Hello, my name's Ema. I was supposed to arrive at 6. Instead, I showed up late. Dust on my sleeves, grease on my hands, and no excuse they cared to hear. They didn't ask why. They just looked at me like I'd failed some silent test. What they didn't know was, the woman I stopped to help on the side of the road? She changed everything. But that night, before she arrived, before the truth cracked through their polished lies, they handed me a glass with no wine, a seat with no name, and a story I wasn't allowed to belong to. What would you have done if the man you loved sat silent while his mother erased you with a smile? I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror longer than I should have. My lipstick was already perfect, my hair combed to a soft, no-nonsense wave. Still, I smoothed it again, adjusted the collar of my navy blouse, smiled, then immediately wiped the smile away. It didn't feel real. Nothing about this day felt real. The reflection that stared back at me wasn't some wide-eyed girl hoping to impress. I was 33. I'd paid my own rent since I was 20, rebuilt my life more times than I could count, and still, the weight in my chest was the same weight I used to feel in middle school when I didn't make the honor roll, like I had something to prove, to people who already made up their minds. The invitation had been formal. Dinner at the Hale residence, 6 p.m. sharp. The word sharp hung like a blade. I slid my phone into my purse and double-checked my printed directions, even though I had GPS. Greenwich wasn't far from New Haven, but it might as well have been another planet. I didn't come from that world. I didn't wear country club names stitched onto my polo. I didn't grow up in a house where dinner was announced by a bell. As I walked to my car, a sensible, slightly aging Honda, I whispered the lines I had practiced with Corwin the night before. If they ask what I do, say I manage nonprofit outreach, not community casework. If they ask about your car, compliment theirs. And whatever you do, don't bring up politics, religion, or the fact you once protested outside a hedge fund's gala. I chuckled to myself, remembering his tone, half loving, half panicked. That was Corwin, warm-hearted, but raised by wolves in pearls. The GPS said I'd arrive 20 minutes early. Perfect. I could breathe, powder my nose in the car, maybe even rehearse my smile one more time. That plan fell apart the minute I hit Route 15. She was on the sidewalk near the exit ramp, a woman, maybe late 70s, slumped against a bench. Her hand was weakly raised as if she'd tried to wave someone down. Her wide-brimmed hat had tumbled to the concrete, and people, lots of people, just kept driving. So did I, for about 3 seconds. Then I braked hard and pulled over. It wasn't a dramatic moment. I didn't feel like a hero. I just couldn't drive by. Maybe because I knew what it was like to sit in pain while the world pretended not to see. "Ma'am?" I called, approaching slowly. "Are you all right?" Her face was flushed, damp. She nodded slightly, but didn't speak. Her breathing was labored, eyes unfocused. "Can you hear me?" I knelt down beside her. "I'm going to call for help, okay?" She tried to say something but ended up coughing instead. I dialed 911 and relayed the location as clearly as I could, watching cars fly past without slowing. While we waited, I slipped off my jacket and laid it over her shoulders. She trembled under it. I found a half bottle of water in my purse and helped her sip a little. "You're very kind," she murmured, almost inaudible. "You'd do the same," I replied gently, brushing hair from her damp forehead. The ambulance took longer than it should have. I checked my phone. I was still going to be okay, 10 minutes late at worst. Then 5 more passed. Then another 7. The EMTs arrived, brisk and competent, and I let them take over. I gave my name, refused to stay for statements. They thanked me, barely looking up. As I walked back to my car, I noticed my skirt had picked up dust, and my hands, greasy from something on the sidewalk, were a mess. And the time? 6:43. Dinner started at 6. "Damn it," I muttered, wiping my hands on a napkin I found in the glove box. It didn't help. I tried to clean my face in the rearview mirror. My lipstick had faded, my eyes looked tired, but I didn't have time to fix anything. I had to go. The Hale estate loomed like something out of a historical drama, 3 stories of flawless red brick, white columns, and perfectly manicured lawns. It was the kind of place you drive by and assume the people inside were born with last names that meant something. My Honda crunched against the driveway gravel like a record scratch in a ballroom. I parked in the farthest corner of the circular drive, away from the gleaming silver and black cars that likely cost more than my annual salary. When I stepped out, the cool spring air hit me like judgment. I ran my fingers through my hair again, took a deep breath, and walked up the stone steps. The butler, I'd never met a real one before, opened the door before I knocked. He didn't smile, just nodded once. "Miss Delara, I presume? This way." I followed him down a hall that smelled faintly of beeswax and aged money. Every wall held some framed painting that looked too expensive to question. We entered the main salon, crystal chandeliers, mahogany furniture, people in clothes that looked tailored and pressed to within an inch of their lives. And then I saw Corwin. He stood stiffly by the fireplace, not quite meeting my eyes. "They're waiting," he said. No kiss, no hug, not even a hand squeeze. That's when I felt it, that familiar pinch in my gut. The one that said I had made a mistake showing up here as myself. Still, I nodded and followed him. We entered the dining room, and every head turned. Isolde Thatch, Corwin's mother, rose to greet me. She looked like an old Hollywood star who'd traded the screen for society columns, her hair perfectly set, pearls glowing against a sharp-collared blouse. She extended her hand and then paused. Her eyes flicked to the dusty streak on my sleeve, the faint line of sweat near my collar, the small, nearly invisible crack in my foundation makeup. Then she pulled her hand back with a tight smile. "You're late," she said, her voice the kind of soft that slices. "We don't value excuses in this house." I opened my mouth to explain, but stopped. Something inside me said it wouldn't matter. They didn't want an answer. They wanted a performance. Zinnia Thatch, Corwin's younger sister, offered me a long, deliberate once-over. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then she turned away. No one asked where I'd been. No one cared about the woman on the bench. All that mattered was that I wasn't polished when I got there. I didn't respond right away. The voice on the other end had said her name like it should mean something. "This is Lucasta. You left before I could thank you. May I still see you?" It was calm, deliberate, like someone who didn't ask questions without already knowing the answers. "Yes, of course," I murmured, still gripping the phone like it might disappear. "Are you all right now?" "I'm well enough," she said with a hint of amusement. "But I don't believe in letting good character go unacknowledged. Can you meet me for tea tomorrow? 11 o'clock. I'll send a car." I agreed, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I just needed someone, anyone, who saw me that night. When the call ended, I stood in the marble hallway, staring at the grand staircase as the faint sound of laughter floated in from the dining room. My coat was still draped over the arm of a chair. No one had come looking. No one even noticed I'd left. I slipped out the door without another word. The night air was cooler than it had been when I arrived. I walked slowly to my car, listening to the gravel crunch under my shoes. I didn't rush, but I didn't linger either. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. Inside my car, I sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel. I stared out at the glowing mansion and tried to gather myself, but nothing felt gathered. I'd been stepped on and spoken over. And Corwin? He hadn't lifted a finger to stop it, not a single glance of concern, not a quiet reach for my hand, not even an awkward deflection when his mother humiliated me. He just watched. I pulled out of the driveway, taking a longer route back toward New Haven, just to clear my head. By the time I reached the interstate, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Corwin. "Sorry about tonight. Things got tense. Let's talk tomorrow?" I didn't answer. At home, I left my shoes by the door and dropped my bag on the couch. I poured a glass of water, but didn't drink it. My reflection in the kitchen window looked like someone I barely recognized, still wearing the face I had prepared, but none of the belief that came with it. The next morning came fast. I didn't sleep much, so I showered early and dressed with purpose. Not to impress, not to correct the wrong from the night before, but to feel whole again. I wore dark jeans, a linen shirt, and tied my hair back. I didn't want elegance. I wanted ease. At 10:59, the car Lucasta promised pulled up in front of my apartment. A deep green sedan with tinted windows and a quiet, suited driver. He opened the door with a slight nod. No words, just quiet professionalism. The drive to her home, less than 30 minutes from where I'd been humiliated, felt like another world entirely. This wasn't Greenwich's elite row of historic mansions. It was tucked away, off a winding road shaded by tall oaks, hidden behind a stone gate that didn't try to impress. The house was modest by comparison, still large, still well kept, but lived in. It had personality. Ivy crawled naturally up the brick. Windows were open, curtains breathing softly in the wind. Lucasta met me at the door herself. She wore a long cardigan over loose slacks, no makeup, silver hair loose around her shoulders. She looked nothing like the socialites I'd met the night before. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice stronger than I remembered. I smiled without force. "I'm glad you called." We sat on a small patio out back, tea already waiting. No servants hovered, no tension in the air. Birds chirped softly in the trees. It felt like the opposite of last night. "You have dignity," Lucasta said after our second sip. "That's a word they don't understand anymore." I blinked, unsure how to respond. She continued, "You stopped when others didn't. You gave me your jacket, you stayed. Do you know how many people passed me before you did?" I looked down at my cup. It was the right thing to do. "That's the thing," she said, her eyes narrowing gently. "Most people don't do the right thing anymore. Not when it's inconvenient. Certainly not when they're on their way to impress people like the Hales." I raised my eyes then. "You know them well?" She nodded, but her expression turned more measured. "Too well. I've watched that family forget what matters. They've wrapped themselves in performance and called it prestige." There was something fierce beneath her gentleness, like a woman who had learned to wield softness as armor. "I had dinner with them once," she added, "years ago. I remember feeling like I'd sat through a museum exhibit, polished, expensive, and utterly lifeless." Her words made me laugh, actually laugh, for the first time since yesterday. Lucasta reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "I hope last night doesn't stop you from believing you belong in spaces like that." "I don't think I want to belong there," I said truthfully. "Not if it means becoming someone else." She nodded slowly, approving. "Then you're ahead of most." We talked for nearly 2 hours, not about work or status or money, but about values, people, small stories of kindness, and hard lessons learned the slow way. Before I left, she handed me a small envelope. "If you ever need anything," she said, "you have my number now." The ride home was quiet. The driver didn't make conversation, which I appreciated. When I got out in front of my building, I noticed Corwin's car parked a few feet away. He stepped out, looking freshly showered, wearing a button-down shirt like nothing had happened. "Emma," he said softly, "can we talk?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I waited. He stepped closer. "About last night. I should have said something. I just didn't want to make a scene." My stomach tightened. "You didn't want to make a scene?" I repeated slowly. He nodded, almost sheepishly. "Yeah, I didn't know how to handle it. My mom, she's complicated." I let out a small breath. "No, Corwin, she's not complicated. She's calculated, and you let her do it." He looked stung, but I didn't care. "I was sitting there completely alone," I continued. "All I needed was one hand, one word. You couldn't even look at me." I froze. He whispered, "It wasn't fair, I know, but I thought if I didn't say anything, it would pass." "Things like that don't pass," I said. "They settle." We stood there in silence. Cars passed. The wind shifted. Finally, I said, "I need some time, Corwin." He nodded, but it wasn't agreement. It was resignation. I turned, walked into my building, and didn't look back. I stayed sitting on the cold bench near the driveway, the phone still warm against my cheek. The estate lights glowed faintly behind me, casting long, elegant shadows across the stone path. I could hear laughter from the dining room drifting through the slightly cracked window nearby, a soft, rolling sound that felt more like theater than joy. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my voice softer than I expected. Lucasta, yes, I'd like that. Tonight, if you're still nearby, she said. Her voice carried no pressure, no urgency, just a calm invitation, like someone extending a hand across the divide. I didn't give her an answer. Not really, but I didn't need to. Something in me had already decided. I thanked her, hung up, and sat still. For a long moment, I let the silence wrap around me. I could feel the tension loosening its grip, just enough to let my shoulders fall. My breathing slowed, but inside, something deeper stirred, a familiar ache, like pressing on an old bruise to see if it still hurt. And it did. I leaned back against the bench and looked up toward the house, this grand, gilded place that had so casually reminded me how unwelcome I was. I had been here only an hour, maybe less, and already it had confirmed what I'd suspected from the start. I didn't belong, not because I lacked value, but because I wasn't pre-packaged in the version of worthy they had built for themselves. My mind wandered, faster than I could catch it. And then the memory returned, full and sharp. I was 13, my older sister's wedding. My mother had told me the color scheme was blush and ivory, so I'd spent the week leading up to it nervously preparing. I didn't want to embarrass her. I wore a light blue dress, simple, respectful. The photographer had taken dozens of pictures, some formal, some candid. The next week, when the photo album arrived, I looked for myself in every group shot and found I wasn't there. When I asked, my mother didn't even blink. "We only keep pictures that match," she said, while adjusting a vase of peonies on the dining table. That day, I learned you could be erased, not by strangers, but by the people who were supposed to love you the most. Tonight felt like a sequel I never asked for. When I finally stood up, the stiffness in my legs reminded me how long I'd been sitting. I walked slowly back to the house, not because I wanted to be seen, but because I refused to sneak out like someone who'd been caught trespassing. The front door was still ajar. Inside, voices echoed down the hall in polite tones. I stepped in, headed quietly toward the foyer where I'd left my coat and bag. Zinnia was standing there, as if waiting. She tilted her head when she saw me, offering a smile that looked like it had been drawn on. "Heading out so soon?" she asked, her tone lilting, like a morning radio host. I nodded, slipping one arm into my coat. "Yes, I think I've had enough for tonight." She watched me for a beat, then in a voice just above a whisper said, "You're sweet." There was a pause, and I almost thanked her until she continued, "But they want a headline, not a heart." She didn't linger. She turned and disappeared down the hall, the click of her heels echoing like punctuation. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't feed the fire. Her words weren't meant to wound. They were meant to remind me of the rules here. Be marketable, not meaningful. I grabbed my bag and walked out the door without looking back. The air outside had cooled again, now tinged with the scent of fresh-cut grass and something faintly sweet. Champagne, maybe. It came from a cart being wheeled toward the patio by a staff member who didn't glance in my direction. They were celebrating something, or pretending to, and I was a ghost walking through their perfect evening. At the bottom of the driveway, I paused to call Lucasta back. This time, I didn't hesitate. She answered quickly. "I meant what I said," she told me. "You stayed with me longer than the ambulance did." "That wasn't a hard choice," I replied. "It is for most," she said. We agreed to meet the next morning. Tea. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere not wrapped in judgment. When I hung up, a strange feeling settled into me. Like something was finally beginning to align after a long, persistent shift off-center. For the first time all night, I felt a connection that wasn't conditional, wasn't performative. I walked toward my car slowly. Just as I reached it, I felt eyes on me. Looking up toward the mansion's second-floor windows, I saw the silhouette of someone behind sheer curtains, watching. Still. I didn't know who it was, but they were there. Witnessing, perhaps for the first time, someone walking away from their game, unapologetically. I slid into the driver's seat and sat for a few moments before turning the key. No music, no podcast, just the quiet hum of the engine and the steady beat of my own thoughts catching up to me. This place hadn't broken me. It had simply revealed what I already knew. When people can't control your image, they try to erase you, but not this time. The next morning, sunlight filtered in through the cracks of my bedroom blinds before my alarm even had the chance to buzz. I lay still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of early traffic drifting in from the street below. My body felt like it had walked miles the night before, even though I'd only moved from a cold bench to the front door, then back to my car. After showering and pulling on a simple cotton dress, I tied my hair into a loose braid and made a cup of black tea. My hands moved automatically, scoop, pour, steep, but my mind was nowhere near the kitchen. I kept replaying the way Lucasta's voice had sounded on the phone. Controlled. Warm. Like someone who didn't just speak with manners, but meant the things she said. At 9:52, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. Driver arriving in 3 minutes, no frills, no name, efficient. By 9:55, a sleek dark sedan pulled up in front of my building. The driver stepped out and opened the door without a word, nodding as if we'd done this before. I slid in, clutching my purse a little tighter than usual. The ride to her home took less than 25 minutes. I recognized the turnoff from the main road now, the one I had driven past a dozen times, never knowing it hit a place that didn't feel like it needed to prove itself. But I wasn't going to Lucasta's home just yet. I still had something unfinished to do first. I asked the driver to take me back to the Hale estate. He didn't question it, just nodded and turned the wheel smoothly toward Greenwich's manicured heart. When we arrived, the mansion loomed in the morning light with the same quiet arrogance it had the night before. The hedges were clipped with military precision, not a leaf out of place. I stepped out and walked up the stone steps, not hesitantly, not dramatically, just with the firm purpose of someone collecting what was hers. I hadn't planned to stay long. Inside, the house was already alive with the quiet clinking of breakfast dishes and murmured conversations. The butler greeted me with a neutral expression, though I noticed his eyes flicked slightly toward the hall before meeting mine. "I'm here to retrieve my shawl," I said simply. He gestured to a nearby table. "Miss Thatch left this for you," he replied, handing me a large, cream-colored photo album. My brow furrowed. "Why?" "She said it might help you feel more included." That didn't sound like Zinnia at all, but I took the album anyway. Opening it slowly, I flipped through thick pages covered in glossy photographs. Generations of perfectly posed faces smiled out from beneath gold-foiled name labels. The kind of album you knew had been curated, not just printed. Each name was carefully aligned beneath the photos. Jonathan, 1947. Margaret William, 1972. Corwin, age 10, Equestrian Cup. Then I reached a recent page. It was the photo from their summer charity event, the one Corwin had invited me to last July. I remembered it well. I wore a soft yellow dress and had stood beside him near the garden arch. Below the photo, in the same golden lettering, was the label, Guest, TBC. My breath caught for just a moment. Not Emma, not even Corwin's fiancé, just Guest. To be confirmed. I felt something inside me settle, an understanding, not a shock. They hadn't just made me feel like a placeholder. They had documented it. I closed the album gently and walked back into the hall, spotting Isolde speaking to a couple I didn't recognize near the dining room. She was gesturing toward the grand piano, her voice honeyed, her tone controlled. I approached the edge of the room and stood there, waiting for a break in conversation. She didn't acknowledge me, so I stepped a little closer. "Isolde," I said softly. She turned, her smile not faltering. "Emma." "Back already?" "I came for my things." She glanced to the butler. "Of course. Can someone fetch Miss Delara's shawl?" As I stood there, still clutching the photo album, Zinnia appeared from behind a column, her expression unreadable. She walked toward me, arms folded. "It's a beautiful album, isn't it?" I didn't reply. She leaned slightly closer, voice low. "We wanted you to have something to remember your time here." I looked at her, steady. You're very good at branding people, Zinnia. I'll give you that. She smirked. You're sweet, Emma, but this family isn't built on sweetness. I turned to go, but paused at the entrance to the dining room. The table was set for breakfast. An empty seat sat at the far end. Not at the head, not near Corwin, just a single chair, removed from the others. No placemat, no silverware, no glass. The message was clear. I took one last look around the room. Everyone was chatting, smiling. Not one of them turned to acknowledge me. Except Corwin. He looked up just as I glanced over, and for a split second our eyes met. I saw it then, the tension in his jaw, the apology he didn't know how to say. And then, just like the night before, he looked away. I didn't feel anger, not anymore, just clarity. I nodded once, politely. Thank you for the hospitality, I said aloud, though I knew none of them were listening. Then I left. Outside, the driver opened the car door again. I slid in, placing the album beside me. As we pulled away from the estate, my phone buzzed with a new message. From Lucasta. Thank you for waiting. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., my driver will come. I didn't smile, not yet. But the ache in my chest eased slightly. Back in my apartment, I placed the album in the bottom drawer of my dresser, not out of anger, just to remind myself later how deliberate people can be when they decide who matters and who doesn't. That evening, as I sipped tea at my kitchen table, I looked out at the quiet street below. Children were biking in loops, a neighbor was watering her front garden, and somewhere, a dog barked at nothing. My phone buzzed again. Same number. Bring nothing but yourself. And maybe an appetite. Lucasta. And just like that, something stirred in me. A sense that maybe, just maybe, the night before had been less of a closing, and more of an opening I hadn't expected. The driver pulled up in front of my building at exactly 9:59 a.m., no more, no less. He stepped out before I could open the door myself, his movements crisp and practiced. With one hand, he gestured toward the back seat and said simply, Ms. Moreau is expecting you. No idle chatter, no unnecessary questions, just professionalism and timing, two things I hadn't encountered much in the last 24 hours. I stepped into the sedan and sank into the plush leather seat, letting the door click shut behind me. As we pulled away from the curb, I watched the city shift around me. Brick townhomes giving way to tall trees and winding roads, the noise fading behind tinted windows. The drive took less than 30 minutes, but the transition in energy was stark. Gone were the prim hedges and manicured perfection of the Hale estate. Instead, Lucasta's property unfolded with quiet confidence. Aged ivy trailing over soft brick, windows open to the breeze, birdsong gently filling the air. It was elegant, yes, but not theatrical. It didn't need to prove itself. The car stopped beneath an arched trellis, blooming with early spring roses. The driver opened the door for me again, nodding once. No other staff in sight. Just Lucasta herself, standing on the front steps with a ceramic mug in her hand. Punctuality suits you, she said, smiling, not the tight-lipped smile of society dames, but something genuine. I try, I replied, stepping out. She wore a long linen tunic and soft trousers, silver hair clipped loosely at the nape of her neck. No makeup, no jewelry, just presence. We walked together through a side path that led to a sun-drenched patio. A small table was set for two, shaded by a soft white umbrella. A teapot steamed gently between two mismatched cups, and plates held fresh-baked scones and cut fruit. No place cards, no servers, no pretense. I never did get the chance to thank you, she said, pouring tea without waiting for me to sit. What you did yesterday, it mattered. It was nothing, I started to say, but she raised an eyebrow and interrupted. Don't minimize grace, especially not in a world that undervalues it. I sat quietly, unsure how to respond. Lucasta sipped her tea and studied me for a moment. Tell me, Emma, what do you believe in? The question startled me, not because it was invasive, but because no one had asked me that in years. People ask what you do, where you're from, who you're with, but never what you believe. I looked down at my cup, steam curling between my fingers. I believe, I said slowly, that if I have to silence my values to be accepted, then that acceptance isn't worth having. Lucasta smiled. Exactly. We spoke for over an hour, not about careers or resumes or who knew whom. We talked about memory, about what it means to belong, about the invisible labor women do, how some of it saves lives and some of it goes unnoticed. She listened, not as someone waiting to speak, but as someone learning. At one point, she leaned back and said, "You showed more grace in 40 minutes than I've seen at that dining table in 40 years. I blinked. You were there? Not formally, she said, her mouth curling into something between mischief and insight. I was scheduled to arrive later that night, but I decided to slip in early, see things for myself. So, they didn't know who you were? I asked, surprised. She shook her head. Of course not. That's how I prefer it. When people think no one important is watching, that's when you see who they really are. She stood then, slowly, and crossed the patio to a narrow drawer built into a garden wall. An antique piece, weathered but solid. From it, she pulled a silver envelope and returned to the table. She placed it in front of me and sat again. I don't usually make declarations, she said, but some things require clarity. Inside the envelope was an embossed letter, official, crisp, and unmistakably real. It read, "The Moreau Heritage Foundation recognizes Ima Delara as a dignified member in support, effective immediately." My breath caught. She watched me read without speaking. I told them last night, she said finally. If she's not welcome, then neither is my money. I stared at her. You'd pull your funding? I already have, she said simply. The moment Isolde reached for the wine instead of your hand. The weight of her words pressed against me like a wave. It wasn't vengeance. It was alignment. A woman who had seen the same things I had and chosen to act rather than excuse. We sat in silence for a few moments, the breeze lifting the edges of the tablecloth. I don't want to become another pawn in a power game, I said finally. And you won't, she replied. Because you already said no to pretending. That's your shield now. As I stood to leave, she walked me back to the car herself. At the steps, she paused. You didn't ask for this. That's why you deserve it. The driver opened the door. I slid in, the letter still in my hands. Halfway down the driveway, my phone buzzed. A message, forwarded from someone I didn't know. Did you know she was a Moreau? Because now we all do. I looked out the window. The roses along the trellis had started to open wider under the sunlight. I didn't need revenge, but I wasn't done yet. By the next morning, my name was no longer just whispered. It was typed, forwarded, reposted, screenshotted. Somewhere between my living room couch and the sidewalk coffee cart down the block, I had gone from being the girl Corwin Hale brought around to the woman Lucasta Moreau named her successor. I didn't check social media. I didn't need to. The text messages alone were enough to tell me the ripple had turned into a current. That afternoon, around 3, there was a knock on my door. I didn't need a peephole to know it was him. I opened it slowly. Corwin stood there, crisp shirt tucked, face a bit pale, eyes uncertain, not nervous, just trying. Can we talk? He asked. I figured you'd come, I said. I didn't move to invite him in, but I stepped aside anyway. He glanced around the apartment like it had changed. It hadn't. You've seen the news, I guess, he started, settling awkwardly into the armchair across from me. I got the sense, I said, keeping my tone even. Mother's a little shaken, he admitted. She didn't expect Lucasta to go public, or to do something so definitive. Is that what I am now? I asked. Definitive? He chuckled weakly. You've always been that. She just didn't want to admit it. I leaned forward slightly. So what changed? He hesitated. She's scared. About the foundation, the family name, public perception, everything. She asked me to talk to you, to ask if you'd come back to the house. For lunch. Just sit down, as equals. I raised my eyebrows. Equals? She didn't use that word, he said quickly. But I did. I studied him. She also called me an embarrassment, last week, at your dining room table. She regrets that. Corwin, your mother doesn't do regret. She does control. His face tightened. Maybe. But she knows she went too far. There was silence between us, not heavy, but full. You don't have to do it for her, he said softly. Do it for you. Close the loop. On your terms. I nodded slowly. One lunch. My terms. That includes where I sit. He smiled, relieved. Deal. 2 days later, I stood in front of the Hale estate once more, this time in a tailored navy wrap dress, hair swept back, heels clicking softly against the marble as I entered through the front doors. No one greeted me with cold stares. No one left me standing at the foyer. This time, the butler led me straight to the main dining room, where the table was already set. Lucasta sat at the head. There was a place beside her, my name in clean gold cursive on the card. The silence when I walked in was immediate, not hostile, not awkward, just alert. Corwin stood when I entered. Zinnia raised a glass as if to acknowledge me, though she didn't sip from it. Isolde gave a nod, lips tight but curled into something that could be mistaken for grace under a microscope. I took my seat next to Lucasta. As the lunch moved forward, conversation swirled around philanthropy, recent press, future initiatives. I answered questions when asked, made comments where appropriate, and didn't overplay anything. Then Lucasta cleared her throat. I'd like to make a proposal, she said, voice steady. Emma has shown herself to be not only compassionate but capable, unshakably so. I would like to make official what I announced in spirit. Emma will take over full management of the foundation, effective immediately. She paused. And I am leaving her the personal estate in Vermont, the one none of you wanted until it became profitable. The air in the room thickened. Zinnia's hand froze over her salad fork. Corwin blinked rapidly. Isolde gripped the base of her wineglass but didn't speak. Lucasta turned to me. That is, if she'll accept. I didn't look at the others, only at her. I'm deeply honored, I said quietly. But I have to decline. You could have heard the butter knife drop. Lucasta tilted her head, smiling ever so slightly. May I ask why? Because I need to build something of my own, I said. Not because I want to prove anything, but because I already know who I am. And this, I gestured to the table, the room, the legacy. This was never mine to inherit. It was mine to walk through, and I've done that. Isolde stared at me, stone-faced. Zinnia blinked too many times. Corwin looked something between proud and lost. Lucasta reached for her teacup, still smiling. Spoken like someone who doesn't need a title to hold authority. We finished lunch. Light talk, some attempted humor, mostly silence. When I stood to leave, Lucasta stood with me. You still have a key to the Vermont house, she said. In case you ever want quiet. I nodded, touched her hand gently, and turned toward the foyer. No one stopped me this time. No one avoided my eyes either. They looked, and they saw. Back in my apartment later that evening, I curled up on the couch with my laptop resting on my knees. The screen glowed faintly in the dim light of the room. Across the top of the homepage, in clean, bold lettering, were the words, Lystra Tech, empowering authenticity. The domain was live. The project had begun. I wasn't building a throne. I was building something better. The soft blue glow of my laptop screen had barely faded from my mind before a new one, brighter, sharper, took its place. Lystra Tech. The logo wasn't perfect yet, but the tagline underneath had been locked in for months. Empowering authenticity. Every time I read it, something in me straightened. It had been just over a year since I'd walked away from the Hales world, leaving behind titles, land, and what most people would have called a golden parachute. But I didn't want to land. I wanted to rise. On my own terms. Most people assumed I started Lystra Tech out of anger. It wasn't that. It was clarity. I wanted to build something for women like me. those who didn't inherit a seat at the table and were never taught how to ask for one, let alone demand it. Women in their 40s and 50s who were too young to be discarded and too seasoned to be silenced. Every morning, I worked from a small co-working space just outside New Haven. Not glamorous, but filled with grit. The walls were covered in whiteboards. My desk was a mess of sketches, wireframes, feedback notes from testers. No one brought me coffee. No one called me darling while cutting me out of conversations. I didn't mind the mess. It was mine. My days were full. Development meetings, product testing, building relationships with local nonprofits. Evenings were for research, budget planning, and a strange new rhythm of watching webinars on digital scaling while eating takeout on my sofa. The irony was that while I stayed focused, the Hale Circle was busy doing what it always did, twisting narratives. A friend forwarded me a link to an event recap from a fundraising gala Corwin's mother attended. In it, she had said, with her usual poise, "Lucasta is very passionate about finding new voices, but even the best intentions can be misread as charity." Translation: Emma got lucky. Another message, this one from someone unexpected. The housekeeper who had poured my tea the night of the dinner popped into my inbox with one line. "They're telling people you were late because you stopped for a spa appointment." Thought you should know. I stared at the screen, lips tight. Not from surprise, but from recognition. It wasn't new. They always rewrote the story to keep their hands clean. I could have responded, could have corrected the record, defended myself, started a public tug-of-war. But I didn't, because I wasn't interested in mudslinging. I was building something that would outlive gossip. So I poured it all into the platform's first real campaign. A series of videos, personal stories from women who had restarted their lives mid-journey. Former nurses launching sustainable farms, teachers turned podcasters, a single mother opening her own bookkeeping firm after being laid off. At the end of each clip, the same line, "Your story, not theirs." I watched the first cut of the campaign in my studio late one night, curled into an office chair, headphones in. When it finished, I sat there for a while, heart full, throat tight. This was bigger than me now. By year 3, Lystra Tech had grown beyond anything I had imagined. We were onboarding new users every week, not just from Connecticut, but from across the country. Word had spread through retirement networks, women's organizations, small business meetups. Partnerships began to form, quietly, then quickly, with local governments, health systems, community foundations. Our revenue wasn't flashy, but our impact was undeniable. We weren't just a platform. We were a movement, one built not on saving anyone, but on giving them the tools to save themselves. And somewhere in the background, unnoticed at first, Prescott Hale Holdings began to bleed market share. At first, it was a slow drift, just a percentage point or two in sectors they had taken for granted: financial literacy workshops, midlife health outreach, workforce re-entry programs they had long used as PR tools without delivering much beneath the headlines. By the 5th year, I had a full-time team of 70 employees, spread across 4 cities. Our name showed up on grant lists, in reports, in local newsletters. I stayed in the background, rarely appearing in videos, never giving interviews. I wanted the women on the ground to be the faces of this work. I wanted them to own the message. But when we got word that our new partnership had pushed Prescott Hale's Q4 projections down by 14%, I knew the silence wouldn't last. Inside their boardroom, a new CEO, Harper Dunn, was reading a thick file. He had inherited the company from the old guard with orders to modernize it, make it leaner, more purpose-driven. He didn't recognize the threat at first, but as he turned the last page of the file, he stopped. A single line read, "Founder CEO, Emma DeLara." He put the folder down slowly, then picked up the phone. "Set up a meeting," he said to his assistant. Immediately. The hum of the elevator was the only sound as I stood still, facing the glass reflection of myself. The floor numbers ticked upward in quiet succession, 5, 6, 7, and I adjusted the single button on my navy blazer. My heels were planted, my breathing even, but every cell in me registered what was about to happen. I had walked into boardrooms before, but this was different. This one held ghosts. When the doors slid open, I stepped out onto the 12th floor of the Lystra Tech headquarters. It was the first time I'd visited this side of the building since we'd converted it into a client-facing suite. I'd never intended to sit in the spotlight. That morning, I made an exception. A young intern named Haley waited just outside the glass-paneled conference room. She held a digital tablet close to her chest and whispered, "They're already inside." I nodded. "Thank you." She opened the door for me. Inside, 5 faces turned toward me. Harper Dunn, polished, mid-40s, wearing the kind of tailored suit that screamed corporate reformer. I'd done my research on him. He'd been brought in to clean up after decades of entitlement, to make Prescott Hale palatable to a new generation of investors. What he hadn't been told, at least not soon enough, was that the storm wasn't in his control anymore. Beside him sat Isolde. She didn't flinch when she saw me. Corwin was there too, eyes shadowed, not quite meeting mine. Zinnia, flanked by a stylist and a PR rep, looked like she'd stepped straight out of a magazine shoot. Hair flawless, lips tight. No one spoke at first. The air buzzed with recognition, like someone had pulled the pin on a grenade but hadn't decided when to drop it. I walked to the head of the table, didn't sit. I opened the folder in front of me and placed 1 copy at each seat. Harper broke the silence. "Miss Delara, thank you for agreeing to meet with us." I didn't reply. I let the pages speak for me. Corwin leaned forward. "It's her," he murmured, barely audible. "She's the one who—" Isolde cut him off with a forced laugh. "Emma, dear, I suppose congratulations are in order." I turned to her slowly. "You came to me." She raised a brow. "We're here in good faith." I tapped the folder. "Your company is requesting a 34% equity-based rescue. You'll find my answer on page 3. Harper shifted. Zinnia reached for her water glass but didn't drink. Isolde tried again, voice sweet but trembling. "You understand the pressure we're under, surely. This market?" "Yes," I said evenly. "It feels familiar. Like being offered a seat, but no glass." Corwin's face paled. I stepped away from the table, pacing toward the tall windows that overlooked the city skyline. For a moment, I let the silence fill the space, letting them remember every moment they had decided my presence wasn't worth listening to. "You had a chance," I said, without turning around. "To know who I was. To ask. To see past what I wore, what I drove, what I didn't say. But you didn't." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I remember standing in your dining room, Ms. Thatch, hands still stained from fixing a car for someone you now take lunch with. I remember being told that punctuality equaled worth, that being present wasn't enough, unless I arrived spotless." Isolde opened her mouth, but I raised a hand, not loudly, just enough to pause her. "This isn't about revenge. This is about refusal." I turned fully to face them. "Lystra Tech will not be acquiring Prescott Hale. We do not partner with legacies built on exclusion." Zinnia's lip trembled. Corwin stared at the table, unmoving. Isolde's smile cracked ever so slightly, but she said nothing. Harper cleared his throat. "Miss Delara, I understand your reasons, but the employees, thousands of them, this deal would protect—" "Then let them be protected by leadership who never left them vulnerable," I said firmly. "My concern is with people, not with brands." Another pause. And then, I gently closed the folder in front of me. Haley knocked once on the door, peeking in. "Ms. Delara," she said quietly. "They're ready for your keynote." I looked around the room one last time. Isolde avoided my gaze now. Zinnia looked like she might speak, then didn't. And Corwin. He looked tired, older than I remembered. Like he'd finally realized something no one had taught him. Apologies don't matter when they arrive after the damage. I exited the room without another word. The door slid shut behind me, sealing in everything I used to fear. As I walked down the hallway, Haley walked beside me. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded. "Better than okay." She handed me a tablet with the keynote schedule. "Want to make any last-minute changes?" "No," I said, sliding it back. "It's time." We walked past rows of glass offices, down a corridor lined with framed quotes from Lystra Tech members. I was never too late. They were just too early to see me. That one had always stuck with me. Inside the auditorium, soft light filled the space, casting a quiet glow on the rows of seats waiting to be filled. I stepped onto the stage, looked out at the empty chairs that would soon hold hundreds of women. Women with stories like mine. Some louder, some quieter, all real. This time, I wasn't asking for a seat. I was building the damn table. I stepped off the stage to the soft hum of polite applause, not thunderous, not theatrical, just warm, sincere, enough. A few women in the front row gave small nods, the kind of nods that say, "I see you," without needing a word. Backstage, I accepted a bottle of water and a quiet smile from one of our event coordinators. I didn't linger for handshakes or photo ops. I wasn't there to be celebrated. I had said what I came to say. That was enough. By the following afternoon, headlines had made their way across the usual platforms. She wasn't invited to the table, so she built her own. The woman Prescott Hale called unfit now outpaces their legacy. And my personal favorite, the woman they rejected built the empire that outgrew them. I didn't comment on any of them. I didn't retweet. I didn't share. But I read them, quietly, alone. Not for vanity, but to confirm something I had always known in my bones. It wasn't about shouting the truth louder, it was about living it long enough that people had no choice but to see it. I heard through a friend, one who still moved in the social circles I'd long since exited, that Isolde had been quietly removed from the Prescott Hale board. Retired for health reasons, the press release said. Corwin had stepped back from any public presence entirely. No interviews, no events, not even a statement. Zinnia deleted every social media account the same week. No one said sorry. But then again, I wasn't waiting for it anymore. A few weeks later, on a crisp morning thick with early spring air, I took a slow walk through the part of town I hadn't visited in a long time. The air smelled faintly of mulch and fresh paint. Things were blooming again. I turned a familiar corner, and there it was. The same sidewalk where I had pulled over 5 years ago, the same bench where I had found Lucasta, her breath short and her pearls glinting in the morning sun. It was still there. But now, on a small bronze plaque mounted discreetly at the base, were words I hadn't known had been added. The kindness you show when no one watches becomes the history no one can erase. I sat down. The wind shifted slightly, rustling the trees overhead. A little girl with tangled curls and scraped knees ran past, then circled back. She eyed the bench curiously, then shaded her eyes from the sun. I slid over without a word, offering her the side that wasn't touched by glare. She sat, swinging her legs without care. She didn't know who I was. That was the best part. That evening, after a simple dinner at home, I found a letter waiting in my inbox. From Lucasta. It was short, typed, but personal. Emma, it read. France suits me. I sleep more. I laugh less, but I mind it less too. She wrote that she was stepping away for good, that the foundation now belonged entirely to the women running it, those who had proven they didn't need direction, just space. She ended the letter with a single line that I read 3 times before closing my laptop. Some doors don't open for us. Some we were meant to build. The next week, I was invited to the unveiling of a new public space built on the site of the former Prescott Hale estate. They had donated the property to the city after a tax audit, and years of dwindling interest made it too expensive to keep. It had been transformed into a community center and public garden, with rooms for entrepreneurship programs, youth art workshops, and local resource fairs. I didn't RSVP, but I went. On a quiet weekday afternoon, I walked past the new iron gate, no longer flanked by marble lions, just ivy and steel. No one recognized me. I wore jeans and a sweater, hair pulled into a bun. There were no cameras, no speeches, just life. Kids chased each other through the garden paths. A couple took engagement photos near the old fountain, now restored and free of its former opulence. The walls had murals now, portraits of everyday people, not ancestors in oil paint. I stood for a while near the courtyard's edge, where a magnolia tree had just begun to bloom, its petals unfurled like soft fists unclenching. The breeze carried the light scent of their opening. A small boy brushed past me, chasing a balloon. I smiled, stepping aside. His mother called after him, distracted but calm. No one asked who I was. And I liked it that way. I wasn't part of that history anymore. I had become something different, not loud, not vengeful, just true. Quietly, but fully, myself. I sat beneath the tree for a while, my bag beside me, hands resting in my lap. The world moved around me, steady, indifferent, alive. And in that space, I felt it. Not victory, not pride. Peace. I used to think acceptance was the prize. Now I know peace is. Some people wait a lifetime for an apology that never comes. Others learn to walk forward without it, and that's where real freedom begins. Emma's story isn't just about being left out. It's about choosing peace over validation, purpose over approval. Have you ever been the one they underestimated, only to come back stronger? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next powerful family story.